Hello and welcome to the inaugural Sheave live stream. My name is Ben Maynard, I am from Sheave, and today me and the wonderful Jeff Cowhig are going to be talking about feature team dreams. If you are online, please feel free to send us questions, send us messages as we go, but without any further ado, let's get straight to the main event. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Ben. How are you?
Very well, thank you. It's nice to have you here today. Thank you for agreeing to have this conversation.
Well, thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here.
Nice. So today we're going to be talking about feature team dreams. It's dreams that I've often had of an evening about being able to achieve feature teams. And you and I have worked in similar organisations and had similar experiences, but are coming at this from maybe slightly different angles today. But before we begin and before we get into the meat of it, Jeff, I'd like to just hand over to you and let you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and maybe what brought you here today.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So I'm Jeff or Jefferson, either is fine. I've spent the last 15 years delivering technology and technology change for banks, first in Ireland and the UK, and then in Asia working for UK and US investment banks. The last few years, I've spent my role in different technology leadership roles. And at the moment, I lead EY's financial services technology transformation team. And what we do is we talk to CIOs and CTOs about how to do things faster and better and cheaper. It's a real honor to be here, Ben. I think, it's a testament to you. I effectively LinkedIn trolled you with a comment on a talk that you'd given. And I think it's a testament to you that you didn't ignore the troll. You didn't even just give me a one-line reply. You said, Jeff, this is important. Let's get on a talk and let's talk this through and see each other's perspectives. So I think that's a testament to you and to your desire to forward some of these tricky conversations. So again, thank you for having me.
Wow, it's a pleasure. And I think the talk that I gave was the how product ownership kills agile at scale, I think, for one of the meetup groups.
Toronto, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's one of my favourite talks. Very clickbaity title. I think I've just written an article actually about it. It's going to be published through Zebia Labs. And I've retitled it, How Product Ownership Can Save Agile at Scale. I thought I'd go for the positive on this a little bit. But no, your comment, it really rang true with me. And I thought this is too good an opportunity to pass up. I want to talk about these things. It's important. And I think the beauty of it is that we actually have very similar backgrounds and we've worked, had the same boss. So I'm not sure if John's actually on here yet, but hi John, if you are. We had the same boss for a while. We've worked in some very similar organisations, so got a very similar experience, I think. So I'm really pleased that you've accepted it. I think it's a testament to yourself as well.
That's true, man. And I want to be clear though, I joked with you before that I feel like the Padawan learner here, and you're certainly the Jedi. I think we all have a lot of respect for you. We know that you've got all of the certifications. You're a very skillful trainer. So today is a learning day for me and for my team as well. So thank you again.
Oh, mate, it's there you go. John's on. Jeff, it's going to be awesome. Let's stop the loving though, and let's maybe start.
Yeah.
We'll start building up to a bit of an argument or something. And welcome, John. Great to see you there. So the format of today will be each of us will take turns, just giving a short overview. Jeff has got some slides because he's a pro.
I'm sorry,
I haven't got slides. I'll just have to depend upon my words and my imagination, and I'll paint some lovely mental pictures. But we'll begin with a little bit of an overview of our stances. Jeff's got a fantastic few slides lined up to give a bit of background into the idea of feature teams as well. We'll go to me. I'll do my piece. Then we'll come together like this, and we'll delve into some of these topics, and we'll pick apart some of the best known and probably least liked parts of less. We'll talk about maybe some of the changes that have been made, and we'll also talk about the book Team Topologies, because I know we have some interesting views on some of the ideas in there. So Jeff, if you're happy, I'll pass over to you, and we can we can get the show on the road.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to share my screen, Ben, if you can let me know
Okay.
when it's visible. Okay, you should be able to see a slide that says Feature Team Dreams. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to switch on my highlighter here, my laser pointer to help. So just a couple of items to discuss. These slides aren't very heavy, and hopefully they're illuminating. I thought, as you said, it was important that we kind of define some of the terms that we're talking about, just so everybody's talking about the same thing. Maybe introduce one or two new concepts to people. Then I suppose you kind of talked about that we're coming at this from different perspectives. You know, I'm coming at this from a place of, I suppose, care for the human individuals and the teams, and also maybe pragmatism around how complicated and complex investment banks and retail banks are in particular, and how tricky it is, and maybe the enormous asks that we're putting on our people in that context. And also then, you know, getting into, well, what's a pragmatic alternative that we could apply? So I'll keep going. Look, we all like an internet meme. I saw this one online. You know, I think the sentiment here is really good. It is that recruiters are asking an awful lot of technology professionals today. You know, for what it's worth, I think that this tweet is exactly wrong, and because I think this is actually the definition of a full stack developer. But I like the sentiment that it's you know, an IT department is something that's far bigger. And I think, you know, when you get into maybe legacy technologies, mainframe technologies, maybe more leading or advanced technologies, as well as different dimensions across maybe cybersecurity, analytics, you know, maybe platform and infrastructure. Some of these things are, you know, really specialisms in their own right. And that's probably what I want to talk about today. So just about me and what I believe in. So, you know, I think, Ben, you and I are probably, as you mentioned, from a similar background, and we actually have remarkably similar career experiences we found out through our conversations. You know, I see a lot of value in the things on the left here, and that's not to say that there isn't a time and a place and a context for the things on the right, but I think, Ben, you and I would probably agree on many of the things on this slide. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, I see myself as a good guy, I see myself as an agile guy, and I'm probably bringing a layer of pragmatism that I see on the ground. And then this next slide, well, I hope Baz Voda and Craig Larman don't mind, but I've taken this image from the LESS website, and I thought it was really important that we just align on what we mean by a feature team. So the definition up here says it's a long-lived, cross-functional, cross-component team that completes many end-to-end customer features one by one. I'm going to stop on the cross-component thing for a second. So when I worked at a US investment bank in Asia, we had coaching from Baz and Stuart and Craig and others at the time. And when we talked about this in training and what we meant by cross-component, we kind of talked about application versus database, maybe versus sysadmin. And we kind of said that, you know, it doesn't make sense to have a separate database team because it'll create queues. And I'm completely bought into that I'm not in any way a proponent of component teams. But I think what's probably not considered here, or perhaps the challenge that I see around this, is that actually in an investment and retail banking context, when you talk about a product, you don't just go cross components, you actually go cross application. And I'll bring that to life with an example later on. And I like this point down here that says the team is expected to learn or acquire the needed knowledge such that they can deliver customer-centric features end to end. And I'm a big learning guy. You know, EY, where I work at the moment, it's a big learning culture. You know, we're encouraging everybody to be continuously learning, lifelong learners. But I think there's probably an upper bound on that, you know, until such time as Elon Musk and everybody gets us Neuralink uploaded. You know, we probably have a finite capacity to keep knowledge and information in our brains. And then another just definition that I took down from the LESS site was around a product. So I've said LESS prefers a broader product definition. And I know, Ben, you've done some really great talks on, let's say, the dangers of having a narrow product definition. I guess what I'm pointing out is that there are kind of drawbacks and challenges with having a very broad product definition as well. So, you know, LESS encourages you to ask these broadening questions to get maybe towards your end state vision for your product, and then some of these narrowing questions, which might get you to maybe your first definition of a product. And again, Ben, I don't want to preach to the vicar here. I'm sure you'll tell us a little bit more about this. I know I think you're the only certified LESS trainer in UKI, and my team and I are looking forward to learning from you. You know what? I guess my point is that as you broaden the product definitions, then you increase the cognitive load on the people working within the product. And I'm going to now just dive to, well, what do we mean by cognitive load? So you mentioned the Team Topologies book, which I actually quite enjoyed. I have a copy next to me here, and I know you do as well, Ben, but it defines cognitive load as the limit that any one person has on the amount of information they can hold in their brain at any given moment. And that, I think, was originally defined by John Sweller in the 1980s, a psychologist, as the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. I was actually listening to a Lex Friedman podcast last night where he was speaking to a neuroscientist, and they were talking about the mechanics of doing programming and engineering, and that actually when you're challenging yourself and thinking deeply, it's the equivalent of working memory. It's the equivalent of using random access memory, where you're running algorithms, you're trying new things, and then maybe you write those things to disk, or maybe you kind of flush the cache. But ultimately, this is limited, you know, as I said, until such time as we're machine augmented. So then, you know, the three different types of cognitive load, and these were new terms to me until I read the book, and I had to immediately go and write them down and read a little more. But intrinsic, extraneous, and germane. And I've tried to bring to life with each, you know, maybe a fun example. So intrinsic is, oh my goodness, COBOL is quite different to Java, isn't it? And I know, Ben, you know that, having written both languages in your career, as I did in my early career. Extraneous cognitive load is the second type. It talks about, so maybe why does this test environment behave differently to that one? So you can see this is something that is maybe specific to the implementation or instantiation of a technology. Maybe you have to remember IP addresses. Maybe you have to remember, you know, usernames and logins. And again, all of this is taking up a little bit of space from that working memory. And the third part is this germane, which is more to do with the domain. And the example I've given here is, you know, whoa, Indian bonds are really complicated, aren't they? And I know this from having rolled out fixed income platforms, actually when I worked for John and others at an organization. And, you know, I can tell you that Indian bonds are really complicated and really different to other bonds. And sometimes they're not even bonds, they're lending obligations, and you can go down rabbit holes really quickly around the business domain. And it's at this point that I say, okay, let's now make this real, and can we have a look at what a product might look like in an investment bank? And I probably know securities, bonds, and equities quite well. And I've chosen something like a securities stack. It's a hypothetical stack that we could look at. You could argue that securities isn't a product. You could say maybe fixed income is a product, or equities are a product. And then within those, perhaps you could say cash equities versus equity derivatives are products. But I think, you know, many of the points that I'm going to make still hold true, actually, regardless of that. So let's imagine we're talking about securities at a typical large investment bank. This is a hypothetical investment bank. It's not any one in particular. But you probably have a set of applications related to sales and trading. So over here, you probably have, you know, some sort of sales application. Maybe it's a third-party package running on Java and Windows. You probably have a main trading application or multiple trading applications. You know, this might be something like a Bloomberg or a Reuters, again, written in some pretty funky technologies. And again, if you're a global investment bank, you might have one of these maybe per legal entity, maybe in some cases one per country. And then over here, we've got maybe a different flavor. So this might be around repurchase agreements. Again, it's a different way of trading the product, if you want to think about that. And then potentially maybe some algorithmic trading. So this is where machines are generating trades and monitoring markets. And this is not an exhaustive list. There could be different ways to capture trades, you know, but this gives you a flavor that actually there's quite a complexity in just capturing the trades in the first instance. But you're not done. You now have to process the trades. So you might have something around, you know, generating payments off the back of those trades. That might be a third-party package, an FIS, a Finastra, or something else. Perhaps you've got, you would almost certainly have some sort of large core processing application. You know, if this was drawn to scale, this would be a big thing in the middle of the page. I worked for a US investment bank, and through mergers and acquisitions, they probably had between 15 and 20 different ones of these. So just this one little green box here that I'm highlighting, probably between 15 and 20 of those. I worked on one of those, And on one of them, we probably had about 100 engineers. So that gives you the indication of scale that if you look at a large investment bank and just this one little green box, you could probably fill a large auditorium with the number of engineers is required to deliver the quantity of change that the bank is looking for. Other applications, so maybe something around collateral management, maybe something around reconciliation, so front office, back office, depot recs. And you can see there's a lot of complexity here in this core processing and operations area. But you're still not done. You then get into things around finance technology, finance and accounting. Maybe you need some sort of trade warehouse to catch the trades. Maybe it's some sort of operational data store, operational data cache. You probably need some sort of accounting rules application. That might be specific to wherever the regulatory regime is. You probably have a sub-ledger. And then what we see more and more, I suppose, especially in the large US investment banks, is a move towards distributed ledger technology or maybe some sort of blockchain application. And again, this could be built on something that's fundamentally different and complex. It could be Ethereum or some sort of native blockchain type solution. But again, you can see a lot of complexity there. You're still not done. You probably have something around risk managing these trades. So, you probably have credit risk, issuer risk, market risk. All of these things, you're now getting into kind of deep, complex calculations. And it's almost a science in its own right. And not to be underestimated, again, different technologies and different skills required. You're still not done. You probably have, enterprise reference data applications, maybe around counterparty, around instrument static, legal entity reference data. And depending on the organization, there might be some sort of, golden sources architectural rule, maybe with a publish subscribe integration pattern, or maybe some sort of fortress architecture pattern where you need to consume these things. So they're effectively potentially part of your product, and you're still not done. And you probably have more, something around analytics, generating insights, maybe visualizing data. I kind of glossed over this, but there's probably a whole suite of security applications and monitoring applications that are running. So this is actually a simplified view of what a product might look like around securities in an investment bank. This is really simplified. It's not an exhaustive list, but if I was to draw a product boundary, I'd probably draw it around the whole thing. And I think it was John in one of the comments on LinkedIn, Ben, and he said, I think he said cake and candles. And I think what he means is that actually, with the exception of the green and the blue, everything else here, from kind of yellow, pink, this peachy color, and the purple, all of those things are shared. So they're enterprise-wide applications. And I've just talked about securities, but these applications are probably shared across foreign exchange, money markets, corporate lending. And actually, to draw a boundary around this as the securities product will create issues elsewhere. So that's my way of saying, look, this is really, really complicated. And the idea that a feature team, which is, less is kind of built upon, let's say, the constraints or rules of the Scrum guide, and I think it's 3 to 9 for a 2 pizza size team. The idea that 9 people would be able to manage the cognitive load to deliver valuable features in an end-to-end way in a stack like this, I just don't think it's realistic. You're potentially talking about tens of millions of lines of code across, tens of different technologies requiring many different specialisms. And I just don't think it's fair to people to expect that. And I think, with aside from the, let's say, the sheer breadth of application expertise that will be required, I think also, when you look at it, we're kind of expecting people to do more as well. We're expecting them to be cybersecurity experts, to be able to design and develop with security in mind. We're potentially expecting them to be data and analytics experts. We're expecting them to be, and in that maybe some sort of machine learning and some advanced analytics capabilities. We're potentially expecting people to be platform experts, infrastructure experts, cloud experts. And then there's more in an IT department. Are we asking them to be risk and compliance experts? Are we asking them to be operational control experts? And I think there's just, it's too much. I think it's too much of a weight that we can, too much to ask of small groups of people. So it kind of brings me back, and this is my last slide, Ben, right? But it brings me back to the Team Topologies book. The book, for those that haven't read it, talks about 4 fundamental topologies. So you have your stream aligned team, which is kind of your value delivering team. They could have gone with product team or squad or one of these overloaded terms, but they chose stream-aligned team because they wanted to focus on flow. You have an enabling team, which is kind of a look-ahead team. It's people that are looking at new tools. It's people that are watching for currency management, maybe some sort of coaching capability within there. You've got this complicated subsystem team. So this would probably map to maybe the Exadata appliance, or maybe the mainframe capabilities that I talked about previously. But the idea is that you have a group of specialists that just specialize in that special thing. And then the last thing is a platform team, and the platform can be as simple as a wiki all the way through to a complex platform solution that would effectively abstract the stream-aligned team from some of the underlying complexity of the infrastructure and the environment, and try to minimize some of that extraneous load. So I'll pause there, Ben. Right? I think what I see is, I should say, and it clearly defines 3 different interaction modes between these 4 types of teams. So one is collaboration, one is X as a service or everything as a service, and the other is facilitating modes. And when I see this, it just seems to me to be quite pragmatic and quite applicable to the skills and the people that I work with on a daily basis. The reality is many financial services organizations are heavily outsourced. They're heavily offshored. The average engineer working in the team, is not a Kent Beck. They're not these kind of super, polymaths that know everything about everything. They're probably people that are relatively junior in their career, that are maybe an expert in 1 or 2 things, that have an ambition to become T-shaped or pie-shaped, but ultimately, they're not quite there yet. And I'd rather bound their responsibility in something that's pragmatic than, say to them that we expect you to be like a Google superhero, that's going to be able to carry this enormous cognitive load for your company. So I'll finish there, Ben. I know that was kind of my intro. I'm going to stop sharing now. I think we've got probably a lot to discuss on the topic, and I look forward to hearing your views.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And it's difficult to know where to start. I feel like I might want to work backwards, but let's see. Let's see how it goes. So I think it's important to, I suppose, if I start with the thing that's in the forefront of my mind, right, which is my major issue, I suppose, maybe that sounds too severe, with what's proposed in Team Topologies is the same issue I have with something like SAFe.
Okay.
Which is when people see that as the end goal rather than having something to shoot for, when it kind of condones what they've already got and makes them feel like they've already achieved enough. And I think that just kind of feeds some of the complacency and status quo, which is so rife in organisations, and stops things from progressing forward. So somebody is saying we're getting a bit of echo. Let me see if I can stop that. Okay. I think that might have helped. If there is still an echo, please put on the chat, and I will see if I can further remedy that. So it's when things like when suggested teams and things like SAFe, when it feeds a status quo, it feeds that inertia that's present in organisations, and stops people from kind of looking beyond that. But let me kind of loop back round and at least talk about kind of why less talks about feature teams and where it comes from. And Jeff, you really make a fantastic point. Is that a lot of less is built upon the constraints. Well, in fact, all of less is built upon the constraints that were laid out in the Scrum Guide. And the problem is with the Scrum Guide is that people have misinterpreted it for years. And I think that what Craig and Buzz did actually was quite insightful. I'm not sure, but they saw something which other people failed to see. And I've in writing this most recent article, I've taken out some statements from the Scrum Guide and just tried to go on a similar journey that I kind of feel that Buzz and Craig went on with less. And it says that that at the end of a sprint you produce an increment, and that increment should be something that is usable, right, and have all the previous increments as part of it, which is fair enough. I think people there's not a lot of argument about that. But then it goes on to say, well, only the members of a development team create the increment. And I think this is the really important part, which people haven't paid enough attention to and then worked back from there. and we say, okay, so it's saying that only the people on the development team will create an increment. Fantastic. The increment needs to be valuable and usable. Fair enough. That all the work that the team is doing should come from the product backlog. There should be one product backlog that multiple teams work from, and that's looked over by a single product owner. So then what that infers, that if you have a team working off of that backlog who has a dependency upon something else, then that team aren't the only people who are creating the increment. So what that is inferring is that whenever you see a dependency between one team and another, then what it's inferring is if that other team, if that's a separate backlog, a separate part of your organization, that means it's part of your product. And this is a journey that Craig and Bars went on, I believe. And maybe I'm sure neither of them are watching, but yeah, I'll run this by them. But I think that's part of the journey, is saying you want teams to have ownership of creating the whole increment. So whenever there's dependencies, it should be part of that same product. Now, the issue that we've then got is that organizations haven't been designed in this way. Like large organizations, the types that you and I have worked in, weren't ever designed for this. And it's something that me and one of the other less trainers, Ahmad Fahmi, have always say, is that for too long the banks had too much money and big organisations had too much money. They didn't have to care about what they were spending. They architecture just grown into this amorphous blob, and there was never any conscious thought put into that evolution. So the situations that you outline, those massive product definitions, it isn't feasible, because those organisations aren't designed right now. And if you watch the less video, it will say, it goes through the whole video, and at the end says, and less won't work for you as your organisation is now. And I think this is some of the big shift that's happened in less over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe a bit longer, which is this idea that, when you're looking at more than 8 teams and you're talking about less huge, it should be incremental and evolutionary. You should be empiric in about the way that you grow your organisation towards this, but it isn't something that can happen quickly for a lot of the things you're saying around cognitive load. So the way that I choose to view less and the way that I choose to view the idea of product is, first of all, I don't really like talking about product definition. I think that it's too definite, and I think that puts people off. I much prefer to think of product as a model. And because, as we know, as George Box said, all models are wrong, but some are useful, I think that we should begin to start looking at less and looking at the idea of product as saying, well, we're not going to define this, and we're not going to say that this is true, and we're never in our industry ever going to get to a single definition of what the word product means. It's jargon now, it's meaningless. Everyone's bent it. I mean, whether if you just take safe and less and Scrum, then you've got kind of varying different perceptions of what product is. And then you factor in something like Prince 2, which then has everything as a product potentially. It's meaningless to us. It's meaningless. So there's no point trying to define it. There's no point having any arguments about it. But what I think there is a point having an argument about in organisations, and it is worth not going for something like the ideas and team topologies and saying this is our goal, is saying, as an organisation, what are you trying to achieve? And let's define a model of product that works for you now, that is the most useful. And if that is going to put a lot of strain on your organisation to go to this ideal end state, then let's take the time doing it. The problem then is that people don't want to take the time doing it because they want the changes now. and this
to work within their existing org structures and hierarchies, right?
Yes, exactly. So they want to maintain the existing org structures, existing hierarchies, look at Lahrmann's laws. He talks about this, Craig talks about this in great depth. And I think this is part of the issue. So in my mind, we should view product as a model. And my recommendation to people is don't adopt less. And also, don't adopt less huge, because they're different frameworks. Let's not get confused. I think people get so hung up on saying, "Oh, well, I don't like less." When maybe they're talking about less huge, or I don't understand less huge. They are different frameworks. So I say, don't adopt less or less huge. Don't have that as your goal, because you'll never achieve it. Instead, focus on what is useful for you. Right? Take the inspiration from elements of less and apply it in your context. If that means that for a while you experiment with some of the ideas and something like team topology, fantastic. But I'd want them to be transitory, because I think that we've got a fantastic capability to learn, and people have got a fantastic amount of potential, which in their current organisational structures remains untapped. And unless we can challenge those structures and untap some of that potential, people's cognitive load will be breached because they're weighed down with everything else in the organisation. So that's my take on it. And I will get off of my soapbox a little bit. And we do have a couple of questions popping up, but I think maybe if we get into some of the nitty-gritty debate of it, and then we can maybe turn to some of the questions in a few minutes. How does that sound, Jeff?
Sounds good. Yeah. So Ben, maybe I could start and say, for the, you're an experienced coach and trainer, right? For the hypothetical investment bank with that securities product and all of that complexity and legacy and whatever you want to call it, right? If they came to you and said, Ben, we want to go faster, better, cheaper. We like the ideas of, we've been on the less website, or how would you have that conversation with them? What would you advise them to do first?
Well, I'd want to make sure that they really had a clear motivation for it, and it wasn't just like the next shiny thing they're looking at. If we kind of cut through all of that and we say, yeah, okay, we're happy, they're happy, we're aligned on a goal, then for me it's about understanding what the ideal product is, first of all, right? And if the ideal product is that diagram that you showed, then fantastic, like that's their ideal product. And then it's really important to hammer home that you're never going to achieve it. You're never going to achieve it, right? But if you look to lean, lean works well in a large part because in Toyota they have a very clear perfection goal. It's a very simple goal, and then everyone is empowered and grown to help contribute towards that goal, however unachievable it may seem. And so the way that I approach it is I help organisations understand the ideal product, understand that maybe it won't be feasible, and then focus on saying, well, where can we focus on first? Where's a sensible place to start? And this is some of the changes that I think have happened in less, perhaps since maybe you were involved with it, I'm not sure, but this idea that with less huge, it is incremental and it is evolutionary, and there's a rough figure of about 50 people that you would start with on a slice through the organisation. And that's generally where I start and try and get some experimentation happening around that thin slice of the organisation. The issue with that is... Sorry, Jeff?
Sorry, would that be like a tiger team pattern? Would that be kind of this super hotshot team that kind of work on the same applications in parallel, or would you stand down existing teams to enable that new 50 member capability to deliver?
It depends on where the organisation is. So if there are existing teams that have all the requisite skills to work on that this initial definition of product and meet the definition of done, which they will set, then we wouldn't want to shake teams up unless they wanted to be shaken up. More often than not, though, what you find is that you do have to piece together a team from various different elements of other teams in order to have a go at really testing things out, because you have to embark upon this experiment with a hypothesis. Like, what are you trying to figure out? What are you trying to learn? Because it isn't... and if we refer this to cognitive load, you want to have an element of learning and execution. And the question is, if you get the best people, are they too entrenched in their specialisms and they don't want to learn because they think they know it all? Well, then that isn't going to work so well. You don't want to get people who are too inexperienced without enough support, because the challenge will be overwhelming for them and they won't really succeed. So there is this very, very delicate balance of kind of saying, okay, well, you want people who are up to learn and to work out of their comfort zone a little bit, and those that are willing those that are willing to learn and those that are willing to teach. And this is why I think doing something like a market of skills at the very beginning is a lovely way of getting people together. And I saw this work very well at Deutsche Bank, where we had one particular team who really embraced it. And they were an interesting mix. They were all quite experienced. There wasn't the junior person there was a vice president who hadn't written any code for 10 years, 15 years, since he's at RBS. And then became a manager. And when he was given the opportunity, which he hadn't had for I think about a decade, and Neil, if you're listening to this, let me know, that he was able to dust off his coding skills again and became, I think I would argue, probably one of our most proficient Scala developers. In that organisation, he picked up a whole, understood big data, understood the Hadoop ecosystem, and did a fantastic job. And that was because he was given the opportunity, and he embraced it. And we talk about cognitive load, and if we talk about coaching, and we talk about how you support people, right? Growth comes from support and challenge.
Right.
And my problem is, with particularly Team Topologies book, is that the reason the argument it provides against feature teams is a singular argument with no evidence. And it is basically saying that you've got complicated code bases and you get cowboys in and they mess it up. Well, that's a lot of assumption there. What if the code base isn't a mess? What if the code base can be fixed? What if people have already started to improve it? What if they aren't cowboys? What if you're looking to embrace an internal open source model? There's a lot of stuff apart that which I just think doesn't make sense, and they've discounted the whole feature team principle in a singular paragraph, it feels, without actually then looking at the broader topic of it, and then chosen to rename feature teams without really showing what I would say a deep understanding of the term itself.
Very interesting. You've prompted two thoughts in my head, right? So I've heard the term in the zone before, Ben, which I think refers to the zone of proximal development, which is somewhere between I'm doing my normal day job and I'm completely comfortable with this, and over here is I'm really in the deep end and I have no idea what to do. And the idea is that you're constantly nudging people and challenging to be in that zone. The other thing that sprung to mind was I listen to Desert Island Discs sometimes, that really cool BBC podcast. And there was a gentleman on, I think it was Sir Anthony Seldon, kind of a great British educator. And he said something like, there's no greater predictor or no better predictor of people's performance than the expectations of their seniors, right? And I absolutely agree with that. I think we need to raise the bar. We need to challenge people to be constantly learning and trying new things and maybe dusting off their coding skills and learning Scala, to your example. But equally, I think we need to be realistic about the upper bounds of that, right? And I kind of jokingly in my little presentation, I talked about Neuralink and Elon Musk, right? I think, if you flash forward 20 years and you assume that something like Neuralink kind of, technology augmented brains, let's call it, if that's a feasible solution, then I could genuinely see a situation where, a feature team could do something like could deliver a product such as the one I described. But until then, it feels to me, inhuman is a really kind of evocative word, maybe provocative word. I don't mean to go too strong, but I kind of feel like got some relatively junior people. They might be great at Java, they might have learned SQL, they want to learn Scala, they want to learn Hadoop, they want to learn something else, but they're not there yet. And I think I like your point about doing it incrementally, right? I'm happy that we challenge people incrementally, but equally, I don't want to kid anybody, and I don't want to mismanage stakeholders and business leads and customers' expectations around some of this stuff that actually, guys, the thing that we have built over the last 30, 40, 50 years, that thing that we spent hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars or whatever it is building, that's really complicated, and there's no magic wand that we can wave over the 9 people, and all of a sudden they'll be able to somehow own and maintain all of that stuff. I think it's just too much stuff. So I do see your point, right? I think we need to set the ambition. I think we need to challenge people to learn, and equally, I think we need to be kind to them and not create a scenario where we're setting them up for.
And you saw me rummaging around now, just picking up my book of the week. Oh, and by the way, Desert Island Discs, I hear that's what all the young kids listen to nowadays, Jeff. So I don't think you're too out of a loop there, mate.
I'm
a big fan of Antiques Roadshow, but.
Yeah.
Each to their own. I was reading around for a book called Humble Leadership, and you used the word inhuman. And it really got me thinking that the one thing that we don't really talk about in any of these frameworks, I don't think. I mean, Les does talk about the 5 relationships with a product owner, which is great, and I think it's a worthwhile addition. But we don't talk enough about the real human relationships. Because what you were saying to me then about not being inhuman just sparked it and thought, well, we are talking about relationships, and it is inhuman if it is complete impersonal domination and coercion. Right? If you are being told, go and learn Scala, you useless piece of whatever, right? And you're not going to get paid, and you're not going to get the promotion, and you're not going to get the promotion if if you're not learning Scala as fast as that person's learning Scala, like that's just inhumane. Or holding, people saying that, saying you're not going to get the promotion, you're not going to get a decent review unless you do this, and you can. I mean, that's just not right. And in no world is that correct. And whatever agile, lean, waterfall, everyone said that there's no place for that. But what I was wondering then is that, the traditional roles that we have and the traditional relationships that we have are very much role based. They're based upon a professional relationship. And if it's interesting, I'll use an example of let's call him Mr. Watmore, perhaps, just to kind of to disguise anybody's identity. That actually, that I was able to develop what I would say is a trusting, cooperative relationship with him. And I wouldn't say that we weren't like best mates. And we knew a bit about each other's personal lives, but like we weren't like friends. We weren't going for lunch all the time. He visited my house once, but we had a relationship where I trusted him, he trusted me. We got along. We could be open and honest about stuff, and that meant that if I was feeling challenged, I could tell him, and if he was feeling challenged, he could tell me, and we could support each other and work through it. But if our relationships are in this kind of the old school professional style relationship, where you can't share that type of stuff and you can't build those relationships, the problem is that when you're looking at that big diagram, no one's going to say, well, everyone's going to think, well, they're going to do what they're told, and I'm going to tell them what to do, when actually that won't work. And I think maybe that's some of the problem, is that we're not human enough about some of this, and we don't appreciate that we need to build relationships and we need to have people trust us so we can be open and honest about the problems that we face. And I think then what that leads to is a lot of anguish. And I think it affects, I know that during all of the transformations that I've been through, my mental health has been affected from all of this, and I've struggled at times to remain sane, and I don't think at times I did remain sane. There've been times going through all these types of things when it was difficult to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And I think that's because I didn't have the relationships around me to support me, and I was too hard on myself. I didn't have that support. And I think that the unfortunate side effect then of saying that here's an ideal product and here's something we should work towards, and an unfortunate side effect of like a less adoption is that people feel the pressure too much and they're not supported enough, and they struggle, and it affects their mental health and their families and ultimately their personal life.
I think it's an excellent point, Ben. I think you're also very brave to disclose that, and thank you for sharing that with me and with us. Look, I've been right there with you, and I've had those tough days, whether it was at some of the places that we worked or other places. But I agree that kind of human leadership is required, and I think especially in this modern COVID work from home times, I think the idea that you're bringing one of these transformations into an organization when everybody can be brought into the same big room and hear the same speech, and kind of go on that journey together. I just dropped the journey bomb. Go on that journey together. But I think it's even trickier now because people are at home, people have got different family situations, and I think it's just an extra layer of it's an extra source of anguish and stress for some people. So I think all the more reason why we need to be more human-centric for these transformations.
We have to be. Because I think it's in the less book. I think some of the guidance is tips on how to stay sane. And it has this, and it's interesting because I think that book was written after your experience of less, I believe. I do wonder how much of the experience of doing being involved in transformation such as the one you were involved in kind of did change things a little bit in the less framework, and maybe softened some of the ideas and took a slower approach to it.
I think it did. I mean, to be quite frank, Baz was coming to my colleagues and I, and he was asking for feedback on things like the ratio of Scrum Masters to feature teams and things like that. We were giving, he was harvesting the insights from the real life experiment that we were. So yeah, I'm sure that our experience was subsequently reflected in the book and in the latest manifestation, let's say, of the framework. Okay, so I like where you're going, Ben. I think, could you tell me a little bit more about when you say don't implement less? Okay.
Yeah.
What would you advise those organizations to do instead? I mean, this is, in a way, it's quite a brave thing for you to say, right? You're a certified less trainer, and you know an awful lot about it. You're probably incentivized in some ways to see more organizations using less. What would you advise them to do instead?
Use safe. No, I wouldn't advise that. No, I think that there's for me, if I use a running analogy. Okay, so I've always had a goal that I wanted to run 10 kilometers in under 50 minutes. Right, and for so long I would download a training regime off of the internet, and I would do it, and then I would follow it for 2 weeks, and I'd break myself, and I'd stop, and then I'd put on some weight, and then 4 months later I'd try it again, and I'd break myself, and then it ended up that I damaged my foot in some weird way, which meant I then couldn't run for a year. All right, so. And the mistake I had made was that I was starting from the wrong point. I was taking this instruction, this recipe, and going hell for leather, when actually what I needed to do was try and find a way to run a 10k in under an hour comfortably, not under 50 minutes. And what I should do is look at some of those and take the ideas and just begin to factor those ideas into my daily being. I should also look at my diet, and that's my advice for less. Is that less is so full of amazing concepts and ideas and tools, right? And the way that they've defined feature teams and the way that they've kind of distilled Scrum down to its essence, I think is wonderful, and I think people can learn so much from that. But what people should do is learn about it, understand what they want to achieve as an organisation, and then look at the less rules and say, okay, well, can we make an experiment? Because most organisations are going to be looking at less huge anyway. If we talk about less huge, can we make an experiment where we can hit these rules and we can take some of the ideas and just try and find a way to make it work for us? How do we need to change the organisation? How do we change HR policies? How people are remunerated? But then conversely, there was some work I did with a startup. I don't know if the class as a startup. They're a small organisation, right? But they're incredibly successful. And they were struggling. They had too many queues of work. I did 2 days training with their CEO and his leadership team. I then came in and did a 1-day self-forming teams workshop. And as I understand it, I don't know if Laura is on here or not. I saw her on the list. That I think it helped them because it gave them a structure and it gave them some ideas. And yeah, they're still practicing and they're still getting better. But talking to the CEO, he was saying that he can come in the morning and he's got a single backlog now. He knows that the most important stuff is being worked on. And before, he was kidding himself. And for them, that was a flip. That was a very short period where they relaunched a completely new way of doing their workload, when that was for 2 or 3 teams. So it depends on the size. If it's small, you can if you've got the right starting conditions, you can flip it. If it's big, then you have to find a meaningful way to figure out what it means to you as an organisation, and don't stress people out, and don't go for that big flip, because to pick up what you said before. So Laura, who was the company I was talking about, she says she's here, and absolutely. So thank you, Laura. That's really nice. That I don't think, given that example that you gave, I don't think feature teams are possible in those organisations, but at the same time, I don't think that people should have their ultimate goal as being let's go for this thing that condones a lot of the rubbish and a lot of the baggage that we built up over the years. Okay.
So if I was to try to steelman your position back to you, you're saying it's not that you're saying don't use less. You're saying look, be really clear about the goal that you're aiming for, and you're saying try to take the essence or maybe some of the key ideas from it, identify, depending on your scale, identify some safe experiments or ways to prove it out, and then see how you can incrementally and evolutionarily grow from there.
Yeah, is that particularly if it's less huge, particularly.
Okay.
If it's less than 8 teams, a small number of teams, it's easier, right? But what you need, to pick up your point, if you've got millions of lines of code, you're going to struggle with going to less huge until you find a way to kind of help people work on those code bases. So there's no even point maybe experimenting with working on those code bases, because it's just going to be too difficult, I would expect, especially if it's written in COBOL or some ancient language which no one knows anymore. So I think you have to take all that into account, and you can't just experiment willy-nilly. And I think if you're doing it less serious, just look through the rules and see how many of those you can tick off. See where you're already strong. See where you need some work. Because unless you follow those rules, you're going to be cutting corners here and there. But what it takes is a real dedication to learning, right? Which is where I think things like team topologies and SAFe plays well into people's psyches, because it isn't a lot. The cognitive load for the reader or consumer of that is not high, and if it is high, then it's temporary until they've read the book or had their SPC training or whatever it is they want to do, and then they're done, and then you can install it and walk away. Right? The challenge of less is that isn't the case. Like, you actually have to understand what you want to do, and I wouldn't say don't use less. I would just say don't adopt it. But
right.
Use it as a means to an end.
That's a really interesting distinction. Use it, but don't adopt it.
So, Jeff, why do you not see that with the whole team topologies thing that people could just kind of condone, like you're just condoning what people have already got?
Absolutely. I could see that skills would atrophy. I could see that you would restrict people's ambition. So, for example, with the pattern of a platform team, you say, okay, we're now going to abstract you from everything to do with your cloud environment, everything to do with your platform as a service. You'll never need to know the IP addresses of those servers. I can see that you're limiting people's learning. And it's a bit like having a low-code development language. Whenever you abstract engineers from actually what's going on under the cover, you're introducing a type of technical risk or solution risk, because if it doesn't perform or if it doesn't behave as expected, all of a sudden you've now got multiple layers of complexity between the people that wrote it and actually what's happening with it. So I do see lots of cons, let's say, Ben, and I absolutely accept your challenge. You know, if one of our goals should be around learning and maintaining a learning organization, then using that kind of less vision for an end-to-end feature team, that's a great North Star to aim for. I completely agree with you. And I can see that, yes, if you tightly bound someone's scope, there is a risk that you'll inhibit their growth and inhibit their learning. And that's probably, you know, maybe it's just that we need to be contextual as well, right? Because, you know, there's no one size fits all here. And I know you speak to your clients and people that you advise about this as well, right? But, you know, I think it's probably quite contextual and specific to the group of people, the type of problem, the technology. Yeah. And I think we probably need to keep an open mind around what types of patterns are right to be applied in each of those circumstances.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, I'm with you. It is contextual, and it's that horrible consultant answer. You know, it depends. But it always does depend. There isn't a best practice. There isn't a silver bullet, as a great man once said. And I must say, I mean, the one thing I took away from the Team Topologies book was I quite enjoyed the interaction types. I thought that was a useful way of codifying something which exists, and I did like that, and I agree with your sentiments there. I'm wondering if I think we've got there's a few comments on here. Now there was a question from Murali Rao. Apologies.
Oh yes, a good friend of mine. Yeah.
Could Streamline Team perform the visionary role in the customer-centric objectives? So could Streamline Team perform the visionary role in the customer-centric objectives?
I think that's probably not the primary purpose of the team as described in the book. So Murali, thanks for the question. You know, in our language, where we worked before, we would have called these things squads or some other overloaded term. But they're effectively the primary engine of value delivery for the customer. Yes, they need to have that high touch engagement with the people that are requesting and the people that will use the solutions. But no, I'd say it's probably more like a traditional product team or value stream delivering team. I think the other team that probably plays into that is the enabling team idea, and that's it's a capability that's forward-looking, that's looking for the next tools and frameworks and accelerators. It's effectively the team that can lift their head and look left and right and over the horizon and see what's a good way to support the Streamline team. And again, then before we even say it, I can see that that's potentially limiting as well, right? Because if one team is responsible for doing all of the research and development and trying out the new tools, then actually you're limiting the stream aligned team's ability to innovate and to try out new things, right?
Well, do you know what it reminds me of? And I'm going to be extreme here for the audience, right? It reminds me of Taylorism.
Yeah.
Right, because you're separating the thinking from the doing. Oh, well, those, they're too busy working. We'll do the thinking about what's coming up next. Let's not burden them. But that isn't right. Right, you should be like this is one of the things I love about less is that it's volunteering. And if someone's got the capacity and wants to do it, then they can volunteer and they can do that work. But they're just called a feature team. We don't overcomplicate it. And sure they can do that work. And it's just this echo, this sentiment of that Taylorist view, which I'm sure they didn't do consciously, but maybe it's my own emotional wounds. It's probably my own emotional wounds, which just leads me to that.
And when you said Taylorism, Ben, my immediate reaction was to jump out of the chair and say, yes, you're exactly right. I have a counterpoint though, right, which is I interviewed a gentleman who's a lead architect for a well-known software as a service product company, right? I won't name the company, but he led the team that effectively built the guardrails for their engineers. So they have a couple of thousand engineers, and they're very constraining in what the engineers are allowed to do or how the engineers are allowed to experiment. And when I interviewed him, I said, does this not limit people's ability to innovate? Does this not, somehow detract from the employee offering to these people? And his answer was, look, we're a business. We're not an R&D shop. There's a balance here. And actually, he saw a lot of value in placing pretty tight guardrails, such that the people in their stream-aligned teams, if you want to call it that they weren't worrying about where the next tool was going to come from. They weren't kind of spinning up skunk works and their own POCs, that actually there was a separate capability that was going to provide those guardrails for them. So I think, again, maybe it's contextual and maybe it's about finding a balance in some of these things. Because you don't want the Wild West proliferation of development tools, but equally you also, to your point, you don't want to get into that Taylorist mindset that says you write the Java code, and you're too busy writing the Java code to think. I think, again, maybe we need to find a balance on it.
But is it like? I wonder though, and I feel like we're kind of we're getting towards the end of our allotted time, and now I feel like we're kind of hitting our stride a little bit. So if you're okay to carry on for a few minutes, I know we've got Deepak's asked a question, which we can come round to in a sec. But I wonder. I think it'd be hard to argue that a Toyota production system, lean, is a manifestation of Taylorism, right? You'd be hard pushed. However, a manager in a Toyota production system does have some responsibility of a structure, policy, and process. Yes. Now, they're guardrails effectively.
Yes.
But it isn't. But then, if those guardrails then detract away from a team's ability to think about the stuff that's going to affect them, then I see that's constraining. But if the guardrails are, and you have to appreciate, if you're going for an internal open source model and you've got thousands of people, there has to be some constraints. Now, how you go about creating those constraints, whether they're bestowed from on high and that's it forever, or whether they come from communities and that's it forever, or whether it comes from either of those angles, but they evolve and grow based upon feedback, I think is valid, because you can't. I think it was David Snowden that said self-management without constraints is anarchy. And there has to be some guardrails. But the interesting thing, and maybe this is a conversation for you and me another day, is do guardrails equal Taylorism? Because I feel like I could argue both ways.
Very good. I see your point.
It's interesting. But so, I mean, we're just about up to time. I know maybe some people have got to drop off. But the Deepak Sala, a friend of yours?
An old friend, from a US investment bank, Thanks, Deepak. It's late where he is.
Well, Deepak, thank you very much for coming along. We really appreciate it. And let me read out what you've written. So you said, the challenge in larger organisations is that adapt it before you adopt it is often used as an excuse to continue doing things the usual way. This is based upon a comment from Joe Tierney, who said, adapt it before you adopt it, which I like that. I'll ask her where she got that from. I like that idea. And that's definitely something that was true at, say, Royal Bank of Scotland, where our ability to really embrace less was completely hindered by our lack of technical expertise and the state of our code bases. So Deepak's asking, thoughts on dealing with this? So how do we deal with adapt it before you adopt it being used as an excuse to continue doing things in the usual way. What are your thoughts, Jeff?
I'd like you to take that one first. I tell you, I'm immediately googling Larman's laws of organizational behavior.
Yes.
Because I think the danger with an adapted strategy is that, number 2, any change initiative will be reduced to redefining or overloading the new terminology to mean basically the same as the status quo. And I think there's a real danger that you could just adapt back to just new names for the existing thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
What do you?
No, I think there is. I mean, this idea of, I don't think it's that politically correct to talk about it anymore, I'm not sure, but the idea of cargo cults, you know, the ritualistic following or relabeling of something in the hope to get a different effect, but actually you don't, because nothing's really changed, which is kind of what Craig's talking about in a number of his laws. I don't think in some organisations that people want to change, right? I think organisations are designed for stasis, by and large. They are not dynamic structures. They are there to, the same way in our bodies we maintain homeostasis, our temperature, and etc. I think organisations are designed for stasis too. So this is why attempts to change them is so hard, because they're not designed to change, they're designed to repel. And when we have leaders or managers, senior managers, there's a difference, in looking after strict organisationally bound collections of people who are rewarded for the performance of that bounded group of people, then there is no incentive there to change. It is no way there is no way beneficial for them to cooperate with their peers unless the big head honcho can kind of say, here's a unifying shared goal, and this is where we all need to work together to achieve this. And it's something that Edgar and Peter Shine say in this book, Humble Leadership, that they give examples of organisations where the leadership team, the executive team are rotated around responsibilities. So that would mean that the head of product is the head of engineering in 3 months' time, and the head of engineering is then the head of HR, and the head of HR is then the head of product. And I love that idea.
Right.
Yeah, and then, I mean, that would be really hard. So that could be a way to kind of break some of this, because you're saying that actually it's how we work together and it's how we achieve greatness as a whole, not how I can stick to my individual silo. And even when I've worked, and I do work with C-level executives in organisations, for them to lay out a broad enough goal which makes it rewarding for people to cooperate is one thing, but then supporting the people who then have to do it is something quite different. And it is a massive challenge, and I think that it has to start with that shared goal and education and understanding and helping people leave if they need to leave. Because you can't expect, as a senior person in an organisation, you can't expect to say, so we've been going this way for the last 10 years, and now we're going to go this way, and I expect you all to come along with me. Now, I expect a number of those people to quit because they didn't sign up for that. And I expect new people to come in, and you hire people based upon your criteria for the new direction, not your criteria for the old, which has been part of the issue.
I heard a statistic actually, Ben, again, I won't reference the organization, but let's call it a large European financial services organization that went through a large-scale agile/DevOps transformation a number of years ago. And I believe that 40 to 50% of their technology workforce left or was helped to leave, let's say. And that kind of ushered in this new culture.
Yeah.
I think you can go even further than that, and you can look at what RBS has done with Bow. I know that's perhaps posed or now looks a little different. You can look at what Nationwide has done with Spire. You have these ideas of kind of start again. That actually you just start again from fresh, new building, new email addresses, new website, new culture, and you kind of build from scratch. It's an alternative pattern, right? It's maybe not every organization has the appetite, ambition, the risk appetite to go after it, but it's another option that.
Well, look at Williams and Glyn. How much money did RBS spend on Williams and Glyn for it never to manifest, because it was a carbon copy of all the evolutionary hangovers that they had all along. It was always always going to struggle to succeed. And to pick up Deepak's point, if you want like a solid thing to say like thoughts and dealing with it, I would say that have a go. I'm just promoting this book because I thought this is a great book and it's the one I've got closest to hand. And have
You're
a
on
look
commission, you said, right?
Sorry?
You said you're on commission as well, didn't you?
No, because Ed Shine and Peter Shine won't accept my connection request on LinkedIn yet. I'm yet to make that connection. But I think build meaningful level 2 relationships, and level 2 relationships are personal, cooperative, trusting relationships. I always say as a Scrum Master, number one, first thing to do, build trust and respect. Don't bother with the rest of it, but build trust and respect. And I think as people going into organisations, if you can build trust and respect, individually with people, and then begin to bring people together, and because they trust and respect you, you're seen as a trusted advisor, you're seen as someone that will call it out and tell them like it is, then you can begin to shift the dial. But if these things happen quickly, it will seem too good to be true. And if things are too good to be true, it's because they probably are. We are over time, Jeff, by 6 minutes. So I feel like perhaps we should bring this one to a close. But before we do, I mean, are there any closing comments that you would like to make? Put you on the spot a little bit there.
So first of all, I'd thank anybody that's tuned in live. I'd thank anybody that's watching subsequently. So then you're going to post a version of this video on YouTube. I want to re-thank you, Ben. You didn't have to do this. You could have just ignored me. You could have given me a one-liner. So thank you for taking on this conversation head on. And I'm really happy actually, because I kind of feel like we've heard each other out. And I feel like I kind of understand your position a little bit better, and as I said, I look forward to learning from you again in the future. So let's keep talking.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Jeff, for coming along. I mean, it was a weird situation. I felt that kind of brought us to this, but I'm forever grateful for kind of having you in my life, and in some ways, I feel that there's a burgeoning friendship which never would have happened unless we made the time to talk and build our level 2 relationship. And I think I'm forever grateful about that. And I am very grateful.
Who would have thought that trolling somebody on LinkedIn could lead to new friendships, huh? There you go.
It's because I'm just numb to people's insults and deeds. I try to approach everything with an open mind, right? And I think I always like to assume positive intent deep down, and I think it pays off. So thank you, Jeff. I've appreciated this, and thank you to everybody that's listened live, and everyone that's listening to this as a recording that will be made available later. I've really appreciated everybody's. Let's bring me up. Everyone coming along. All the comments we've received. We've had a great number of people for this first live stream. I think that's due in part to some of the fantastic promotion that was done by Jeff, and just a fantastic topic. We will be running more of these. I'm going to ask Jeff if he can come back and maybe do something else. If you know someone that would be interested in having a conversation about any topics, however contentious, you can get me at ben@sheave.co.uk, or find me in Ben Maynard in LinkedIn, or at Ben W Maynard. I'll put all this in the description as well. I'm happy to talk to anybody about anything for as long as they would like. We don't necessarily have to live stream it too. And which brings this one to a close. Again, thank you to everybody for coming along, for dialing in. I really appreciate it. I hope you got something useful for it. Please add a comment, share it with your friends, put it on LinkedIn, talk about how great it was. We would love more people to hear what we had to say. If you're interested in seeing me do my thing in some less training, I have a course in March. I'll put the link to it in the description. It'd be great to see some of you there. And all that leaves me to say is goodbye, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.